Essien Okoro had spent 5 years searching for a ghost until the ghost stood right in front of him. On a dusty roadside in Lagos, he saw her. Zara, barefoot, thin, holding 2 children who looked exactly like him. His heart leapt, then shattered. She didn't run into his arms. She stepped back, her eyes filled with fear, not love. The children clung to her, trembling, staring at him like a stranger. Why would a woman who once loved him disappear while pregnant and return like this, and who had turned his own family into something that feared him? Before we go on, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Subscribe and stay with me. This story will stay with you. Essien Okoro was no longer the man people once pitied. 5 years had reshaped him, sharpened him into something harder, quieter, and far more powerful than the struggling young man he used to be. In the heart of Lagos, his name carried weight now. His company, Okoro Holdings, had risen from a modest logistics startup into a respected enterprise that moved goods across borders, negotiated contracts with international partners, and employed hundreds of workers who depended on his leadership. From the outside, his life looked like a complete transformation. A story of grit rewarded of a man who refused to be broken by hardship. His office overlooked the Atlantic glass walls, reflecting both sunlight and the city's restless movement. He wore tailored suits, drove a black luxury car, and attended meetings where his voice was listened to carefully. But behind all of that success, there was a silence that never left him. A silence shaped like a woman who had disappeared without a trace. Zara Nwoke. Even now, 5 years later, her name lived quietly in his mind, like an unfinished sentence. There were days when Essien could move through meetings, negotiations, and business decisions without thinking of her. Days when he almost believed he had accepted her absence. But then something small, a scent, a passing face, the sound of laughter that resembled hers would tear open that fragile illusion. And he would remember everything. He had searched for her longer than anyone thought reasonable. The police had stopped taking him seriously after the first year. They filed reports, nodded politely, and eventually moved on. To them, it was another missing person case that led nowhere. But Essien never moved on. He visited hospitals, morgues, shelters. He traveled outside Lagos into nearby towns, asking questions that no one could answer. He paid private investigators who brought him fragments, false sightings, mistaken identities, empty hope. Some said Zara had run away. Others said she must have died. A few whispered darker things, that maybe she had chosen a different life, a different man, that she had left him willingly and never looked back. Essien rejected all of it, not because he was blind, but because he knew Zara. He knew the way she used to hold his hand when they walked through crowded streets, as if letting go would mean losing him forever. He knew the quiet strength in her voice when life became difficult. He knew how fiercely she protected what she loved. Zara was not someone who disappeared without a word, and she would never have left while carrying his child. That was the truth that haunted him the most. She had been pregnant, 3 months along. He remembered the day she told him. It had been early morning, the sun barely rising, the room still holding the coolness of the night. She stood near the window, her hands trembling slightly, her eyes searching his face as if she was afraid of what she might see there. When she told him everything inside, him shifted. Fear, yes. Responsibility, certainly. But above all, there was a quiet, overwhelming sense of purpose. They were building something real. A family. He had promised her. That day promised that no matter how hard things became, he would take care of her, of their child, of the life they were creating together. And she had smiled. That smile. It had stayed with him long after she was gone. In the months that followed her disappearance, Essien held on to that memory like an anchor. It was proof that something had gone wrong, terribly wrong, that whatever had happened to Zara was not her choice. Because if she had chosen to leave, she would have said something. She would have given him a reason. But there had been nothing. No note, no call, no message, just absence. And absence can be louder than any explanation. As the years passed, people around him began to change the way they spoke about Zara. At first there had been sympathy, concern, support. Friends had stayed close, offering help, accompanying him on searches, encouraging him to keep hope alive. But hope is exhausting. And over time, their voices softened into something else. Essien, you have to accept it. She's gone. You can't keep living like this. Even his closest friend, Tunda Balogan, had said it one evening over a quiet drink. Man, you've done everything you could. 5 years. That's more than most people would do. You have a life now. You built something incredible. You can't let the past hold you hostage forever. Essien had listened in silence, his eyes fixed on the glass in his hand. I'm not being held hostage, he said finally. Tunda sighed. Then what do you call it? Essien didn't answer immediately, because the truth was difficult to explain. It wasn't obsession. It wasn't denial. It was something simpler. He hadn't found the truth yet, and until he did something inside, him refused to rest. I call it unfinished, Essien said quietly. That word stayed between them. Unfinished. That was exactly what Zara had become in his life. Not a memory he could close, not a chapter he could move past, but a question that had never been answered. And questions like that have a way of shaping everything. Even his success carried her shadow. There were nights when Essien would sit alone in his penthouse apartment, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the windows, and wonder where she was. Was she alive? Was she safe? Did she think of him? Did she regret leaving? Or had she truly chosen a life without him? Those thoughts came and went, never settling, never resolving. But one thing never changed. He never stopped searching, not completely. Even when his business demanded more of his time. Even when the world around him pushed forward relentlessly. Even when logic told him that the chances of finding her were almost non-existent. A part of him kept looking, quietly, relentlessly, because somewhere deep inside he believed she was still out there. And then, on an ordinary afternoon that didn't feel different from any other, he saw her, not in a photograph, not in a report, but standing under the harsh sunlight of a slum road holding 2 children who carried his face. In that single moment, 5 years of questions collapsed into something far more complicated. Because finding her did not bring peace. It brought fear, not his fear, hers, and that changed everything. Before the silence, before the questions, before the long years of searching, there had been something simple and rare between Essien Okoro and Zara Woke, something that did not begin with wealth or status or advantage. It began with struggle. They met in a place most people would not remember, a crowded roadside food stall tucked between a mechanic workshop and a row of small kiosks in Surulere. The air was always thick with the smell of fried plantains, engine oil, and dust. People came and went quickly, too busy surviving to notice anyone else. Essien had been one of them. At the time, he was just another young man, trying to build something out of nothing. He ran small delivery jobs on a borrowed motorcycle, transporting goods across the city for clients who barely knew his name. Some days he earned enough to eat twice, other days he didn't. Zara worked at the food stall. She wasn't loud or attention-seeking. In fact, most people overlooked her. She moved with quiet efficiency, serving customers, clearing plates, counting coins with careful precision. But there was something in her presence, something calm and steady that stood out once you noticed it. Essien noticed, not immediately, but gradually. It started with small exchanges. A nod when he arrived, a brief smile when she handed him his plate, the way she remembered his usual order even when the stall was crowded. Beans and rice. Extra pepper, she said one afternoon, already preparing it before he spoke. Essien had looked at her surprised. You remember. Zara shrugged lightly, but there was a softness in her eyes. You come here almost every day. He smiled, then a rare, unguarded smile. Not every day, only when I can afford it. That made her laugh, a quiet laugh, but genuine. That was the beginning. Their conversations grew slowly, like something careful being built piece by piece. There was no rush, no grand declarations. Just shared moments between two people who understood what it meant to struggle. Essien told her about his dreams, not in a boastful way, but with a quiet determination. He wanted more than survival. He wanted stability, respect, a future where he wouldn't have to count every coin before making a decision. Zara listened. She didn't dismiss his ambitions, and she didn't romanticize them either. She simply believed in them in a way that felt real. "You're not like the others," she told him once. "What does that mean?" Essien asked. "They complain about their situation," she said. You're trying to change yours." That mattered to him more than she realized, because belief, when it comes from someone who has nothing to gain, carries weight. Over time, their connection deepened into something neither of them tried to define too quickly. It wasn't built on convenience or need. It was built on trust. Essien began staying longer after his meals, talking with her once the rush slowed. Zara would sit for a moment, wiping her hands on her apron, listening more than speaking. They shared stories of their pasts, fragments of childhood family loss. Zara had grown up without much stability. Her parents were gone early, and she had learned to take care of herself, long before she should have. There was a quiet resilience in her shaped by years of navigating a world that didn't offer many second chances. Essien saw that strength, and he respected it. Eventually, the space between them changed. It happened one evening when the stall was closing. The sky was turning a deep orange, the noise of the street softening as people returned home. Essien lingered, as he often did. Zara stood beside him, her arms folded loosely, watching the fading light. "You don't have to stay," she said gently. "You've already eaten." Essien glanced at her. "Maybe I'm not staying for the food." She didn't respond immediately, but he saw the slight shift in her expression. A moment later, she asked, "Then why are you staying?" Essien hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because saying it felt like crossing a line he couldn't uncross. "Because of you," he said finally. The words settled between them, quiet but undeniable. Zara looked down her fingers, tightening slightly against her arms. For a moment, Essien thought he had said too much too soon, but then she smiled. Not the polite smile she gave customers, something softer, something real. That night, everything changed. From then on, they were no longer just two people sharing conversations between busy hours. They became something more, something steady and deeply rooted. Their relationship wasn't perfect. They argued sometimes, especially when stress from their daily struggles became too heavy. There were days when Essien came back frustrated, exhausted from work that didn't pay enough, from clients who didn't respect him. Zara would listen, but she didn't always agree. "You can't let anger guide you," she told him once, her voice firm but not harsh. "You want to build something better, then you have to be better than what's around you." Essien didn't always like hearing that, but he needed it, and he knew it. As time passed, they built a life together. Not a grand one, but one filled with intention. They moved into a small rented room, barely large enough for two people, with a thin mattress, a single fan, and a window that didn't fully close. But it was theirs. They shared meals, laughter, quiet evenings where words weren't necessary. And through it all, Zara remained the same, steady, grounded, deeply loyal. She believed in Essien even when progress was slow, even when failure seemed closer than success. "You'll get there," she told him more than once. "Just don't give up." Those words stayed with him. They became part of the foundation he built his future on. But as their life slowly began to stabilize, something else began to shift. Subtle at first. Zara became quieter, not distant exactly, but more withdrawn. There were moments when Essien would catch her staring into space, her thoughts somewhere he couldn't reach. "Are you okay?" he asked one evening. She nodded too quickly. "I'm fine." He wanted to believe her, but something didn't feel right. Then came the day she told him she was pregnant. For a brief moment, everything else faded. The fear, the uncertainty, the pressure, they were all replaced by something brighter. Hope. Essien held her that day, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, but it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose. They talked about the future, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the life they would build for their child. Zara smiled more in those moments, but even then, there was something behind that smile, something Essien couldn't fully understand. And in the weeks that followed, the changes became harder to ignore. Zara would leave the house at odd hours, saying she needed to run errands. She avoided certain conversations, deflected questions with gentle but firm responses. "It's nothing," she would say. "Don't worry." But Essien did worry, because the woman he knew, the woman who shared everything with him, was now holding something back. And whatever it was growing. He felt it in the silence between their conversations, in the way her eyes sometimes carried fear instead of calm, in the tension that lingered in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Essien didn't know it yet, but those small changes, those quiet moments of unease, were the beginning of everything that would soon fall apart. The night Zara disappeared did not begin like a tragedy. It began like any other night in their small rented room, quiet, warm, and filled with the ordinary rhythms of two people learning how to build a life together. Outside, Lagos pulsed with its usual restless energy. Distant horns, laughter from nearby houses, the occasional shout from the street, all blending into a familiar background that neither of them paid much attention to anymore. Inside, the air felt heavier than usual. Essien noticed it the moment he stepped in. Zara was sitting on the edge of the bed, her back slightly hunched, her hands resting protectively over her stomach. The small fan in the corner rotated slowly, pushing warm air around the room. The light above them flickered once before settling. "You're back late," she said without looking up. Her voice was calm, but not the calm he was used to. "I had to finish a delivery across town," Essien replied, dropping his bag near the door. Traffic was bad. He watched her carefully as he spoke, waiting for the small signs he had learned to read. Over time, a smile, a glance, something that told him she was present with him. But she didn't look at him. Instead, she nodded faintly, her fingers tightening just slightly over her belly. "Did you eat?" he asked. "Yes," she said. Another short answer. Another wall. Essien walked closer, sitting beside her on the bed. The mattress dipped slightly under his weight. He turned toward her, studying her face. There was something there. Not sadness, not exactly fear. Something deeper. "Zara," he said gently, "what's going on?" She shook her head almost immediately. "Nothing. You've been saying that for days. I'm just tired." "You're not just tired." Her jaw tightened at that. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint hum of the fan and the distant noise of the city. Essien reached for her hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't hold on either. That scared him more than anything. "Talk to me," he said quietly. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." Zara finally looked at him, and for a split second, Essien saw it clearly. Fear. Real fear. But it vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. "I said I'm fine." She repeated, her voice softer now but firm. Essien exhaled slowly, trying to control the frustration rising in his chest. He wasn't angry at her. He was afraid. Afraid of what she wasn't telling him. Afraid of what might be coming. But he didn't push further. Not that night. Instead, he nodded and stood up, moving toward the small table in the corner where they kept their few belongings. He poured water into a cup, took a sip, then glanced back at her. She hadn't moved, still sitting, still holding her stomach, still distant. Later that night, they lay side by side in silence. The room was dark now, the city sounds softer, replaced by the occasional barking of dogs and the rustling of night air through the broken window frame. Essien stared at the ceiling. Zara lay on her side, facing away from him. He wanted to reach out to pull her closer, to remind her that she wasn't alone. But something held him back, something in the way her body was tense, as if she was already somewhere else. "Zara," he whispered. No response. He waited. Nothing. He assumed she had fallen asleep, but he was wrong, because sometime in the middle of the night, she woke up, quietly, carefully. Essien didn't hear her at first. Sleep held him in a shallow grip, his body exhausted from the day's work. But some small shift in the air stirred him just enough to linger at the edge of consciousness. Zara moved slowly, her movements deliberate. She sat up on the bed, pausing for a moment, as if listening. Then she turned. Her eyes rested on Essien. In the darkness, his face was calm, unaware. For a long moment, she just looked at him, her expression unreadable, except for the tears that silently slid down her cheeks. She raised a trembling hand as if to touch him, but she stopped midway. Her fingers curled slightly, then fell back to her side. A quiet breath escaped her lips, shaky, almost breaking. Then she stood, careful not to make a sound. She moved to the corner of the room, picking up a small bag Essien hadn't noticed before. It was already packed. That meant this wasn't sudden. This wasn't impulsive. This had been planned. Zara hesitated again at the door. Her hand rested on the handle, unmoving. Behind her, Essien shifted slightly in his sleep. For a moment, she almost turned back. Almost. But something inside her hardened, or maybe something inside her broke. Without another sound, she opened the door and stepped out into the night. The door closed softly behind her. And just like that, she was gone. When Essien woke up, the room felt wrong. At first, he couldn't explain it. Everything looked the same. The same walls, the same table, the same faint light creeping through the window. But something was missing. He turned instinctively. Zara, no answer. He sat up. The bed beside him was empty. Still warm, but empty. "Zara," he called again. Louder this time. Silence. A strange unease settled in his chest. He stood quickly, scanning the room. Her sandals were gone. The small bag they used for groceries gone. His heart began to race. No. He moved to the door, pulling it open. Outside, the morning was just beginning. A few people passed by, going about their routines, unaware of the panic rising inside him. "Zara!" he shouted, stepping into the street. Heads turned, but no one answered. He ran. Down the road, past the food stall where they had first met, past the familiar corners of their neighborhood. "Zara, nothing." He asked people, strangers, neighbors, "Have you seen her?" "My wife Zara, have you seen her?" Some shook their heads, others barely listened. Time blurred, minutes became hours. Hope slipped through his fingers with every unanswered question. By midday, his voice was hoarse. By evening, his steps slowed. And, by night, reality began to settle in. She was gone, not lost, not missing in the way people get delayed or confused. Gone, without a word, without a trace, without him. Essien returned to the empty room, long after the streets had quieted. He stood in the doorway, unable to step inside. because crossing that threshold meant accepting what he didn't want to believe. Finally, he entered. The silence hit him immediately. Heavy, unforgiving. He looked around, searching for something, anything that might explain what had happened. But there was nothing. No note, no message, no sign, just absence. And in that absence, something inside Essien shifted. Not broken, not yet, but changed. Because deep down, he knew. Zara hadn't left like this without a reason, and whatever that reason was, it was bigger than both of them. The road into Makoko was narrow, uneven, and lined with structures that seemed to exist more by determination than design. Corrugated metal roofs leaned against each other like tired shoulders. Wooden planks stretched over shallow, murky water. The air carried a mixture of smoke salt and something older, something worn down by time. Essien Okoro had driven through many parts of Lagos before, but this place felt different, not just poorer, heavier. As his black car rolled to a slow stop at the edge of the settlement, people turned to look. Not openly, not boldly, but with the kind of quiet curiosity that follows anything unfamiliar. A man like Essien didn't belong here. He stepped out anyway. The polished shine of his shoes dulled instantly under the dust. The contrast between him and the surroundings was almost jarring, tailored suit against torn fabric-controlled composure, against raw survival. But none of that mattered to him. Not now. Because just a few meters ahead, he saw her again. Zara. She stood near a small wooden stall, her back partially turned, a worn cloth wrapped around her waist, her shoulders thinner than he remembered. Her hair, once carefully braided, was now loosely tied strands escaping in uneven lines. In her arms, a little girl no older than 4, rested against her chest, her face pressed into Zara's shoulder. Beside her stood a boy, slightly older, his hand gripping the edge of her dress. Both children were watching the world cautiously, like they had learned not to trust it. Essien's breath caught. He had seen them once already from a distance, but now standing this close there was no doubt. They were his. The boy's eyes, the shape of his face, the girl's expression, even in her quietness. There was something unmistakable, something that hit Essien with a force he wasn't prepared for. 5 years. 5 years of wondering, of imagining, of fearing the worst. And now, the truth stood in front of him, alive, fragile, and painfully real. He took a step forward. Zara. Her name left his lips like something sacred. She froze. For a moment, the entire world seemed to pause around them. Then slowly, she turned. Their eyes met. And everything Essien had imagined, every version of this moment he had played in his mind over the years, collapsed instantly. Because Zara did not run to him. She did not cry his name. She did not show relief. She stepped back. A small movement, but it felt like a wall being built between them. "No," she whispered under her breath. The boy looked up at her, confused. Mama Zara tightened her hold on the little girl, pulling both children closer to her body. Her eyes darted around, scanning the surroundings, not in recognition, but in fear. That's when Essien felt it. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. "It's me," he said, his voice softer now, careful, as if speaking too loudly might break something fragile. "Zara, it's me." She shook her head slightly, as if trying to deny what she was seeing. "You shouldn't be here," she said quickly. Her voice trembled, not with emotion, with urgency. Essien stopped a few steps away, his heart pounding harder with every second. "I've been looking for you," he said, "for years." "I thought—" "Stop," she cut in, her voice sharper now. The children flinched at the tone. Zara lowered her voice immediately, glancing down at them, before looking back at Essien. "You need to leave," she said quietly. Essien blinked, confused. "What, you can't stay here?" she continued. "You shouldn't have come." Her words didn't match the moment. Not at all. After 5 years, after everything. This wasn't supposed to be her reaction. Zara, Essien said, stepping closer, despite her warning. What are you talking about? Come with me. Let's go home. At the word home, something shifted in her expression. Pain. Deep, buried pain. But it passed quickly, replaced again by that same guarded fear. There is no home, she said. That's not true. It is. No. Essien insisted, his voice breaking slightly now. We can fix this. Whatever happened, we can fix it. Just come with me. You and the children. At that, the boy tightened his grip on Zara's dress. The little girl turned her face away from Essien, burying it deeper into Zara's shoulder. They weren't just hesitant. They were afraid. Of him. That realization hit Essien harder than anything else. He took a step back instinctively, his hands lowering. I'm not going to hurt you. He said more to the children than to Zara. The boy didn't respond. He just stared, watching Essien with cautious, uncertain eyes. Who is he? The boy asked quietly. The question cut deeper than anything. Zara hesitated, just for a moment. But in that moment, Essien saw it. She didn't know what to say. That was the truth. She didn't know how to explain him, and that silence said more than words ever could. Essien swallowed hard. He began, but the words caught in his throat. What was he supposed to say, I'm your father? To children who looked at him like a stranger. Zara shook her head, slightly a silent plea for him to stop. Don't, she whispered. Essien stared at her. Why, he asked, his voice low-controlled, but filled with something deeper. Why are you doing this? I'm not doing anything, she said quickly. Yes, you are, he replied. You disappeared. You took my children. And now you're standing here like I don't exist. Her eyes flickered at that. Guilt, pain, fear, all of it, layered together. I didn't take anything from you, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Essien exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Zara, look at yourself, he said, his voice softening again. Look at them. This isn't right. You're struggling here. I can help you. I want to help you. I don't need your help, she said immediately. But even she seemed to hear the weakness in her own words. Essien took another step forward, slower this time. You don't have to do this alone anymore, he said. Whatever you're running from, whatever happened, tell me. Let me fix it. Zara's eyes widened slightly. Running! That word landed somewhere deep. I'm not running, she said quickly. But this time Essien didn't believe her, because everything about her said otherwise. The way she kept looking over her shoulder. The way her body remained tense even as they spoke. The way her eyes never fully settled. She was afraid. Not of him. Of something else. Something close. Something watching. Zara, Essien said quietly, his voice dropping lower, now more serious. Who are you afraid of? She didn't answer, but her silence was louder than anything she could have said. A sudden noise from behind a distant shout. A movement between the narrow pathways made her flinch. Her grip on the children tightened instantly. Go, she said urgently, her voice barely above a whisper now. Essien, please, just go, the way she said his name. It wasn't rejection, it was desperation, and that changed everything, because, in that moment, Essien understood one thing clearly. Zara hadn't just been surviving all these years. She had been hiding, and whatever she was hiding from was still close enough to make her afraid. Essien did not leave. Not after 5 years. Not after finding Zara standing in front of him with fear in her eyes and his children clinging to her like he was a threat. He stood there, rooted in place, even as the murmurs around them began to grow. People in Makoko were watching now, not openly, not boldly, but enough. A man like Essien didn't blend in here. His presence was too clean, too controlled, too out of place. And in a place where survival depended on knowing who belonged and who didn't, that made him noticeable. Zara noticed it too. "Essien," she said again, her voice tighter now. "You need to go. Now." "No," he replied quietly. Her eyes widened slightly, not in anger but in fear. "You don't understand," she said. "Then make me understand," he answered. A pause. The kind of pause that carries too many unspoken things. Zara looked at him like she wanted to say something, like the words were right there pressing against the barrier she had built inside herself. But she swallowed them. "I can't," she said. Essien took a slow breath, forcing himself to remain calm. Pushing her wouldn't work. Not like this. So he changed his approach. "Okay," he said gently. "Then don't explain everything. Just tell me one thing." She hesitated. What she asked, her voice guarded. "Are you safe?" The question landed heavily. For a moment, Zara didn't answer. Her eyes flickered, not to Essien, but past him, toward the narrow path behind him, where shadows shifted between wooden structures and hanging cloth. Essien followed her gaze instinctively. There was movement. Nothing obvious, nothing clear, but enough to make something in his chest tighten. "I'm fine," she said quickly. Too quickly. Essien looked back at her, his expression unreadable now. "No," he said quietly. "You're not." Before she could respond, the little girl in her arms stirred, lifting her head slightly. Her eyes, wide and cautious, met Essien's again. For a brief moment, something softened. Curiosity. Then fear returned, and she buried her face back into Zara's shoulder. The boy didn't move. He kept staring at Essien, watching him, studying him. "Why are you here?" the boy asked. His voice was small but steady. Zara stiffened. Essien swallowed, lowering himself slightly so he was closer to the child's height. He began, then stopped, because the truth felt too heavy to drop into a moment like this, but lies would be worse. "I've been looking for you," he said finally, "for both of you." The boy frowned slightly. "Why?" The question hit harder than the first. "Why?" "Because I'm your father. Because I've missed every moment of your life. Because I didn't even know your names until today." Essien's chest tightened. "Because you matter to me," he said instead. The boy didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. Zara shifted uneasily, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "That's enough," she said, her voice low but firm. "Essien, please, you're making this harder." Harder than what he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she adjusted her hold on the little girl and took a step backward. "We can't do this here," she said. "Then where?" Essien asked immediately. Her eyes flickered again, calculating, weighing something. Finally, she shook her head. "There is nowhere," she said. "That's not true," Essien insisted. "You don't have to live like this. Not anymore." Her expression tightened. "You think this is about living?" she asked, her voice suddenly sharper. The shift caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" Zara let out a quiet, bitter breath. "You don't understand anything," she said. "You come here dressed like that, talking about taking us away like it's simple." "It is simple," Essien said, though his voice softened as he spoke. "Come with me. Right now. I'll take you somewhere safe. We'll figure everything else out later." Zara shook her head. Again, more urgently this time. "No, you won't." "Why not?" "Because it doesn't work like that," she snapped, then immediately lowered her voice again as a few people nearby turned to look. The children flinched at the sudden change in her tone. Zara closed her eyes briefly, as if trying to steady herself. When she opened them again, they were filled with something deeper, something closer to the truth. "You think you can just walk in here and take us," she said quietly. "Like no one will notice. Like there won't be consequences." Essien's expression shifted. There it was again, that word without being spoken. Consequences. Who, he asked, his voice dropping. "Who are you talking about?" Zara didn't answer, but her silence confirmed everything. Essien's jaw tightened slightly. "Zara, listen to me," he said, his tone more serious now. "Whoever it is, they don't scare me." "They should," she replied immediately. The certainty in her voice made something inside him pause. Not doubt, awareness. This wasn't fear built on imagination. This was real. "You don't know what they're capable of," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper now. "You don't know what they've already done." Essien took a slow step closer, lowering his voice to match hers. "Then tell me," he said. "Let me help you." "I am helping you," she said quickly, "by telling you to leave." The words hung between them, sharp, final, but Essien didn't move. Instead, he looked at her, really looked this time, at the exhaustion in her face, at the tension in her shoulders, at the way her eyes never stayed still. And suddenly everything became clearer. This wasn't just about fear. This was about protection. She wasn't pushing him away because she didn't want him. She was pushing him away because she believed staying would put him in danger. That realization settled heavily in his chest. "Zara," he said quietly, "you're trying to protect me." Her lips parted slightly. Just for a second, and that was enough. Essien saw it. The truth. "You think if I stay away I'll be safe," he continued. She didn't deny it, but she didn't confirm it either. She just looked at him, with that same mixture of fear and something deeper, something that hadn't disappeared even after 5 years. "Please," she whispered, "just go." Essien exhaled slowly. For the first time since arriving, he took a step back, not because he was giving up, but because he understood something important. Pushing her now would only make things worse. "Okay," he said finally. Zara blinked, surprised. "I'll go," he continued. "For now." Relief flickered across her face, but it didn't last. "Thank you," she said quietly. Essien nodded once, but before turning away, he looked at the children again. At the boy who still watched him carefully. At the little girl who refused to look at him at all. "I'm not leaving for good," he said gently. Zara's expression tightened. "I will come back," he added, "and next time, I won't leave without you." For a moment, Zara looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't, because something in his voice told her it would be useless. Essien turned and walked away, slowly aware of the eyes following him, the quiet whispers rising again as he moved back toward his car. But his mind wasn't on them. It was on Zara, on the fear in her eyes, on the truth she refused to speak, and most of all, on the realization that this was no longer just a reunion. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Because whoever had taken Zara from him 5 years ago still had a hold on her now. Essien did not drive far. He left Makoko slowly, the narrow wooden paths giving way to uneven roads, then to the louder, faster movement of the main streets. But instead of returning to his office or his apartment, he stopped a few blocks away, far enough not to draw attention, close enough to come back quickly. He turned off the engine and sat in silence. The air inside the car felt heavier than before. Zara's face stayed in his mind. Not the Zara he remembered from years ago, the woman who smiled easily, who believed in him without hesitation, but the one he had just seen. Tired, guarded, afraid and hiding something. Essien leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes briefly. He had imagined this moment for 5 years. He had imagined anger, tears, explanations, anything that could make sense of what had happened. But he had not imagined fear. That changed everything. Because fear meant pressure. Fear meant control. Fear meant someone or something still had power over her. And that was not something Essien could ignore. He reached for his phone. There was only one person he trusted enough to involve in something this complicated. "Tunde," he said as soon as the call connected. A pause on the other end. "Essien." "You good?" No, Essien replied. "I found her." Silence. "Then what?" "Zara," Essien said, his voice steady but low. "She's alive. She's in Makoko." Another pause, longer this time. "You're serious?" Tunde asked. "Yes." "And the baby?" Essien's grip tightened slightly around the phone. "Not a baby anymore," he said. "2 children." Tunde let out a slow breath. "They're yours." Essien didn't hesitate. "Yes." The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. Tunde didn't respond immediately. When he did, his tone had changed, more focused, more alert. "Okay," he said. "Tell me everything." Essien did. He described Zara's condition, the children, the way she reacted, the fear in her voice, the way she kept looking over her shoulder, and most importantly, the way she had begged him to leave. When he finished, there was a brief silence. Then Tunde spoke again, more serious than before. "That's not normal," he said. "I know. She's being controlled." Essien exhaled slowly. "That's what I think." Tunde didn't waste time. "Stay where you are," he said. "I'm coming." By the time Tunde arrived, the sky had begun to dim slightly, the harsh brightness of the afternoon softening into something quieter. He stepped out of his car and walked over, his expression already tense. "You don't look okay," he said, sliding into the passenger seat. "I'm not," Essien replied. Tunde nodded once. "Good. That means you're thinking clearly." Essien gave him a brief look. "That's your definition of good, in situations like this?" "Yes." Tunde leaned back slightly, crossing his arms. "Start from the part that doesn't make sense," he said. Essien didn't need to think about it. "All of it," he replied. Tunde almost smiled, but didn't. "Okay," he said. "Then let's break it down." He listened again, this time more carefully, interrupting occasionally with questions. "Did she look injured? Malnourished?" "Yes." "Fear level?" Essien paused. "High," he said. "Not panic, but constant, like she's used to it." Tunde nodded slowly. "And the environment controlled?" Essien replied. "People watching, quiet, no one interfering." Tunde's expression darkened slightly. "That's not just poverty," he said. "That's structure." Essien turned toward him. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Tunde continued, "places like that don't run on chaos. They run on control. Someone is in charge. Someone always is." Essien felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "That man," he said. "There was someone watching. I didn't see him clearly. But she reacted." Tunde leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Then we don't go in blind," he said. Essien frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we learn before we act," Tunde replied. "You walking in there like a hero is not going to save her." "I'm not trying to be a hero," Good Tunde said, "because heroes get people killed in places like that." The words were blunt but necessary. Essien didn't argue. Instead, he nodded slowly. "So what do we do?" Tunde didn't hesitate. "We watch." That night they returned. Not openly, not like before. Essien changed his clothes, simple, worn, unremarkable. Tunde did the same. They left the car farther away this time and walked in on foot, blending as much as possible into the movement of people coming and going. Makoko looked different at night. Darker, quieter, but not peaceful. There was a tension in the air, subtle but constant. Conversations were lower movements, more deliberate. Shadows stretched longer, hiding more than they revealed. Essien felt it immediately. This wasn't just a place people lived. It was a place people survived. They moved carefully, keeping their distance from Zara's area, observing without drawing attention. After a while, patterns began to emerge. Zara worked constantly. She moved between small tasks, cleaning, carrying, assisting at the stall. The children stayed close, rarely wandering far, always within her reach. But more importantly, there were watchers, men who didn't work, men who stood in certain places, speaking to no one, yet watching everything. One of them caught Essien's attention immediately. Tall, broad-shouldered, standing near a narrow pathway that led deeper into the settlement. He didn't move much, but his presence was enough. People avoided him, not obviously but consistently. Zara noticed him too. Every time she passed that direction, her body stiffened slightly. Her eyes lowered, her steps quickened. Essien felt his jaw tighten. "That's him," he said quietly. Tunda followed his gaze. "Bako Dantala," he muttered after a moment. Essien turned slightly. "You know him?" Tunda's expression didn't change, but his tone did. "Not personally," he said. "But I've heard of him." Essien waited. Tunda exhaled slowly. "He runs things here," he said. "Debt control, labor, protection, if you want to call it that." Essien's chest tightened. Protection from what? Tunde glanced at him. From him. The simplicity of the answer made it worse. Essien looked back toward Zara. She was speaking softly to the children now, her expression gentler in that moment, but the tension never fully left her body. "She's trapped," Essien said quietly. Tunda didn't argue. "Yes, and he's the reason, most likely." Essien's hands curled slightly into fists. "I'm not leaving her here, I know," Tunda said. Essien looked at him. "But we do this right," Tunda added firmly. "Or we don't do it at all." Essien held his gaze. "And what does right look like?" he asked. Tunda didn't answer immediately, because the truth was complicated and dangerous. "It looks like understanding exactly what we're dealing with," he said finally. "Before we make a move," Essien nodded slowly. But inside him, something had already shifted. This was no longer just about finding Zara or bringing her home. This was about breaking whatever had been holding her captive for 5 years. And for the first time since he saw her again, Essien wasn't just searching anymore, he was preparing. The next morning, Essien returned alone. Tunda had insisted on patience, on gathering more information, on understanding the structure of control before making any move. But there were some things Essien couldn't leave to observation alone. He needed to see his children again. Not from a distance, not hidden in shadows, but as a man trying to reach something that belonged to him, and yet felt completely out of his reach. He dressed simply again, avoiding anything that would draw attention, and walked back into Makoko, with a steadier pace this time. The place was already alive with activity, people carrying goods, children moving in small clusters, voices rising and falling in a rhythm that felt both chaotic and controlled. Essien kept his head low, but his eyes were searching. It didn't take long to find them. Zara stood near the same stall, her movements mechanical but precise, as if she had trained herself to function without thinking too much. The little girl, Layla, sat on a wooden crate nearby, quietly watching everything. The boy, Kofi, was crouched on the ground drawing shapes in the dust with a small stick. For a moment, Essien didn't move. He just watched, noticing the details he hadn't been able to fully take in before. Kofi's posture alert even when focused on something small. Layla's silence, not the natural quietness of a child, but something more cautious, more withdrawn. And Zara, always aware, always scanning, even while working. Essien stepped forward slowly. This time Zara saw him almost immediately. Her reaction was the same. Tension, fear, urgency. But something else was there too now. Resignation. "You came back," she said quietly. "I told you I would." Her eyes shifted briefly, checking the surroundings before returning to him. "You shouldn't have. And you shouldn't be here," he replied. The words landed differently this time. Not as an argument, as a truth. Zara didn't respond. Instead, she turned slightly toward the children. "Kofi," she said gently. "Come here." The boy hesitated. His eyes moved from Zara to Essien, then back again. But he stood, slowly, carefully. He walked over, stopping just within reach of Zara's hand. "Stay close," she added softly. Kofi nodded. Essien watched the exchange, something tightening in his chest again. This wasn't just caution. This was conditioning. "Can we talk?" Essien asked. Zara didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted again toward the narrow path, toward the places where watchers stood without appearing to watch. Then back to him. "Not long," she said. Essien nodded. He lowered himself slightly again this time, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm not here to take you by force," he said. "I just want to understand." Zara let out a quiet breath. "You don't need to understand," she replied. "You need to leave. That's not going to happen," Essien said calmly. She closed her eyes briefly. "I knew you would say that." "Then stop telling me to go." A pause. Zara opened her eyes again, and for the first time since he found her, there was less resistance in her gaze. Not acceptance, but fatigue. "You always were stubborn," she said softly. Essien almost smiled. "Only when it matters." For a brief moment, something familiar passed between them. Then it was gone. Zara looked down at Kofi, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "This is not your world anymore," she said. Essien followed her gaze. "They are my world," he replied. Her fingers tightened slightly. "You don't know them." The truth of that stung, but Essien didn't deny it. "No," he said quietly. "But I want to." Zara looked at him again, searching his face, as if trying to decide whether that desire was enough. Kofi spoke, before she could respond. "Why do you keep coming?" he asked. His voice was steadier now than the day before, still cautious, but curious. Essien shifted his attention to him. "Because I've been looking for you," he said again. Kofi frowned slightly. "But we didn't lose anything," he said. The simplicity of the statement hit hard. Because from the child's perspective, they hadn't lost him. They had never had him. Essien felt that realization settle deep. "You didn't lose anything," he said carefully. "But I did." Kofi didn't understand that. It showed in his expression. Zara did. Her gaze dropped briefly. "Essien," she said, her voice quieter now, but he continued. "I lost 5 years," he said. 5 years of knowing you, of watching you grow, of being there." Kofi's grip on the stick in his hand tightened slightly. He didn't respond, but he didn't turn away either. Layla shifted on the crate, watching the exchange silently. Essien looked at her. "You like drawing?" he asked gently, nodding toward the lines Kofi had made in the dust. Kofi hesitated, then nodded once. Essien glanced around, then crouched slightly, picking up a small piece of broken wood nearby. "Can I?" he asked. Kofi looked at Zara. She didn't respond. Not directly. But she didn't stop him either. That was enough. Essien knelt, drawing a simple shape in the dust. A small house, Nothing elaborate, just lines, a roof, a door. Kofi watched closely. After a moment, he crouched again beside him, and without speaking, he added to the drawing. A tree, then another. Layla slid off the crate, moving closer, slowly, curiosity pulling her forward despite her hesitation. She didn't speak, but she knelt beside Zara, watching. Essien didn't push. He didn't try to close the distance too quickly. He just stayed there, drawing, letting the moment exist without forcing it. For the first time, the tension shifted, slightly. Not gone, but different. Zara watched them all, her expression unreadable, but her breathing had changed, slower, less tight, as if something inside her was remembering what it felt like not to be afraid, even if just for a moment. Then a voice cut through the air. Zara. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The effect was immediate. Zara's body stiffened. Kofi stopped drawing. Layla moved back instinctively. Essien looked up and saw him, Bako Dantala, standing at the edge of the path, watching, not angry, not shouting, just watching. But the weight of that gaze was enough to freeze everything in place. Zara stood quickly, pulling the children close. "I told you not to bring attention," Bako said calmly. His voice carried authority without effort. Zara lowered her head slightly. "I didn't." Bako raised a hand. She stopped. Essien stood slowly, his posture straightening. The shift in energy was immediate. This wasn't just tension anymore. This was confrontation. Bako's eyes moved to Essien, taking him in, measuring him. "You're new," he said. Essien didn't respond. Not immediately. Because in that moment, he understood something clearly. This man wasn't just part of the problem. He was the center of it. And whatever came next would not be simple. Bako Dantala did not move closer. He didn't need to. The space between him and everyone else seemed to belong to him already. People nearby slowed their movements without being told. Conversations softened. Eyes shifted away. It was the kind of quiet that didn't come from respect, but from understanding. Understanding of who held power. Essien felt it immediately, but he didn't step back. He stood where he was, his body still angled slightly toward Zara and the children, as if refusing to break that fragile connection that had just begun to form. Bako's gaze rested on him for a moment longer. Then slowly, it shifted to Zara. "You've been busy," Bako said calmly. Zara lowered her eyes. "No," she replied quietly. Bako's lips curved slightly, not into a smile but into something colder. "No," he repeated. The word lingered in the air. Zara didn't answer. Kofi tightened his grip on her dress again. Layla pressed herself into Zara's side, her small hands clutching tightly. Essien noticed everything, every reaction, every sign, and it confirmed what he had already begun to understand. This man didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone controlled the situation. Essien took a slow step forward. "I'm the one you should be talking to," he said. Zara's head snapped up slightly. "Essien!" She started, her voice filled with warning, but it was too late. Bako's attention returned fully to him. For the first time, there was a flicker of interest in his expression. "Oh," Bako said. His tone was almost curious. Essien met his gaze without hesitation. "Yes," he said. "I'm here to see my family." A pause. Then Bako glanced briefly at Zara. "And the children." "Your family," he repeated. The words sounded unfamiliar in his mouth. Zara's breathing quickened slightly. "This has nothing to do with him," she said quickly, stepping slightly in front of the children. But Bako didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Essien. "You don't look like you belong here," he said. "I don't," Essien replied. And neither do they. That landed, not loudly, but clearly. For a brief moment, something shifted in the air. Not tension, something closer to a line being drawn. Bako tilted his head slightly, studying Essien more carefully now. People come here for many reasons, he said. Most of them stay because they have no choice. Essien's voice remained calm. They have a choice now. Zara's hand tightened on Kofi's shoulder. Essien, stop, she whispered urgently. But Essien didn't look at her. He kept his focus on Bako. Because this was the moment everything that had been hidden was starting to surface. Bako took a small step forward. Not aggressive, but deliberate. And what makes you think you can give them that? He asked. Essien didn't hesitate. Because I can. Simple, direct. Bako's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in calculation. Confidence, he said. That's dangerous in a place like this. It's only dangerous if you're wrong, Essien replied. For the first time, a faint smile touched Bako's lips. You're not afraid, he observed. Essien shook his head slightly. No, he said. That wasn't entirely true. But it didn't matter, because fear in front of a man like this would only give him more control. Bako let the silence stretch for a moment. Then he shifted his gaze back to Zara. She owes, he said simply. The word dropped like a weight. Essien's expression didn't change. Owes what he asked. Zara closed her eyes briefly. Essien, please. But Bako answered everything he said. Another pause. She came here with nothing. Bako continued. No money, no support, 2 children, and a story that didn't matter to anyone. Essien's jaw tightened. So you helped her? He asked. Bako's smile returned. If that's how you want to see it. Essien didn't react immediately. He knew this type. Not from personal experience, but from the world he now operated in. People who turned desperation into leverage, who offered survival but at a cost. And now? Essien asked. Now she pays, Bako replied. The simplicity of it made it worse. Zara's head remained lowered. The children stayed silent. Essien felt something shift inside him. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. You're exploiting her, he said. Bako shrugged slightly. I'm giving her a way to survive. At what cost? Bako didn't answer that. Instead, he stepped closer, just enough to close the distance between them to something more personal. You're not from here, he said quietly. You don't understand how things work. Essien held his ground. Then explain it to me. Bako's eyes held his for a long moment. Then he spoke again. She works, he said. She earns. She pays back what she owes. That's the agreement. And if she doesn't, Bako's expression didn't change. She doesn't have that option. The answer was clear. Too clear. Zara's breathing became uneven now. Please, she whispered, though it wasn't clear who she was speaking to. Essien turned to her briefly. You don't have to stay here, he said again. But before she could respond, Bako spoke. She does, he said. Essien looked back at him. No, he replied. She doesn't. Bako's gaze hardened slightly. Careful, he said. You're speaking like you have authority here. I have authority over my family, Essien said. The words were firm, unshaken. Zara flinched slightly, not at the words, at what they might cause. Bako's eyes flickered again this time, not with curiosity but with something closer to irritation. Family is a luxury, he said, one she couldn't afford when she came here. Essien's voice dropped lower. She had a family, he said. You took advantage of the fact that she was alone. Bako didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. But his silence was enough. You want to take her? Bako asked suddenly. The directness of the question shifted everything. Essien didn't hesitate. Yes. Zara's head lifted sharply. No. But Bako raised a hand again, and she fell silent. Then pay, he said. The word echoed differently this time. Not abstract, not vague, clear, transactional. Essien's eyes narrowed slightly. How much, he asked. Zara shook her head quickly. No, Essien, don't. But Essien didn't look at her. He kept his focus on Bako, because now the truth was fully exposed. This wasn't about fear alone. It was about control through debt. Bako studied him for a moment, then gave a number high enough to make most people walk away, a number designed to keep people trapped. Essien didn't react, not outwardly, but inside, something settled. This wasn't impossible. It was calculated. You'll have it, he said. Zara turned to him, her eyes wide. No, she whispered. You don't understand, I do, Essien said quietly. And for the first time, she saw something in him she hadn't seen before. Not just determination. Power. Real power. Bako watched the exchange closely. And for the first time, he looked uncertain. Just slightly. You're serious, he said. Essien met his gaze. I am. The silence that followed was different, heavier, because something had shifted. The balance, not completely, but enough. Bako stepped back slightly. Then you have time, he said, but not much. Essien nodded once. That's all I need. Bako looked at him one last time, then turned and walked away. Just like that. But his presence didn't leave. Because everyone knew this wasn't over, not even close. Essien turned back to Zara. Her eyes were filled with something new now, not just fear, something closer to dread. What have you done? She whispered. Essien looked at her steadily. I'm bringing you home, he said. But deep down, he knew this was no longer just about money. It was about something much bigger and far more dangerous. Zara did not speak for a long time after Bako walked away. She stood there, her arms wrapped tightly around Layla. Kofi pressed close to her side, her eyes fixed on the ground as if looking up might make everything collapse faster. Essien waited. He had learned something important in the last few hours. Pushing her too hard would only drive her deeper into silence. But silence wasn't safety. Not anymore. Finally, she spoke. You shouldn't have said that, she whispered. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired. Essien exhaled slowly. He asked a question, he said. I answered it. Zara shook her head, her fingers tightening slightly around Layla's small arm. You don't understand how this works, she said. You don't understand him. Then help me understand. Essien replied. She let out a breath that sounded almost like a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. You think it's about money, she said. Essien didn't respond immediately, because part of him knew she was right, but another part needed to hear it. Isn't it? He asked. Zara lifted her eyes to him. For the first time since he had found her, there was no attempt to hide what she was feeling. Fear. Real, unfiltered fear. If it was just money, she said softly, I would have left a long time ago. Those words settled heavily between them. Essien felt his chest tighten. Then what is it? He asked. Zara glanced around again instinctively, her gaze sweeping past the familiar watchers, the narrow paths, the invisible boundaries that shaped her world. Then she looked back at him. They don't let people leave, she said. Essien's expression hardened slightly. They just told you a price. Zara shook her head. That's not freedom, she replied. That's a test of whether you're worth watching. Essien frowned. Zara continued, her voice low, careful. If you pay, they don't lose anything, she said. They gain attention. They gain interest. They gain a reason to look deeper into who you are and what else they can take. Essien listened every word, sharpening his focus. This isn't just a place where people owe money, she added. It's a place where people get trapped. He understood that, more than she realized, because in his world, control didn't always look like chains. Sometimes it looked like agreements, contracts, debt, obligation. You're saying even if I pay, they won't let you go, Essien said. Zara didn't answer directly, but the look in her eyes was enough. No one leaves, she said quietly. Kofi shifted beside her, his small hand gripping her dress tighter. Mama, he whispered. Zara glanced down at him immediately, her expression softening for a moment. It's okay, she murmured. But it wasn't, and everyone there knew it. Essien crouched slightly again, lowering his voice. Why didn't you tell me, he asked. Zara closed her eyes briefly. Because telling you would have brought you here, she said. And that's exactly what you didn't want. Yes. Why, she hesitated. Then finally she said the truth she had been holding back. Because I thought if I stayed away, you would be safe. Essien felt something shift inside him. Not anger, not yet. Something deeper. You disappeared for 5 years, he said quietly. You let me believe you were gone. Dead, or worse. Zara's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I know, she whispered, and you thought that was protecting me. I thought it was the only way, she said. Essien let out a slow breath, running a hand over his face. You should have trusted me. I did, she replied softly. That's why I left. The words hit harder than anything else she had said, because, twisted as it sounded, it made sense to her. She had trusted him enough to believe he would survive without her, that he would build something better, that he would stay away from whatever danger had taken hold of her. But she hadn't trusted him enough to face it with her, and that hurt. Essien stood slowly, his posture straightening again. Who brought you here? He asked. Zara hesitated, then shook her head. It doesn't matter anymore. It matters to me. It shouldn't. It does. Their eyes met again, and this time there was no avoiding it, because the past, the real past, was starting to push its way forward. Zara looked away first. I had no choice, she said. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give. Essien stepped closer, his voice dropping again. Someone forced you, he said. She didn't respond, but her silence confirmed it. And you've been here ever since, he added. Yes, working to pay a debt that never ends. Zara's lips pressed together. Yes. Essien looked around, at the people moving through their routines, at the watchers standing still, at the invisible lines that defined who could move freely and who couldn't. This place, he said quietly, it's not just a slum. No, Zara replied. It's a system, yes, and Bako is just part of it. Zara glanced at him sharply. Don't say his name like that, she whispered. Not here. Essien noticed the reaction. The instinctive fear, and it told him everything. You're not just afraid of him, he said. No, she replied. Then who? Zara didn't answer. Because that question led somewhere deeper, somewhere she had spent 5 years trying not to go back to. Essien studied her carefully. Then more gently he asked, What happened to you, Zara? Her eyes filled again, but this time the tears didn't fall. I survived, she said. Essien shook his head slightly. That's not what I asked. A long silence followed, the kind that builds before something breaks. Finally, Zara spoke again, but her voice had changed, quieter, heavier. I was taken, she said. The words landed softly, but their impact was immediate. Essien's body went still. When he asked, "The night I left," she replied. His chest tightened. "You didn't leave," he said slowly. "No. You were taken." Yes. The truth, simple, brutal, hung between them. For 5 years he had questioned everything, her loyalty, her choice, her silence, and now everything shifted. "You should have told me," he said again, but this time his voice carried something different. Not accusation. Regret. "I couldn't," Zara replied. "Why not?" "Because they made sure I couldn't." Essien felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "Who are they?" he asked. Zara's gaze lifted to his, and for the first time, there was no hesitation, only fear. "The ones who don't want you here," she said. A distant sound echoed through the narrow paths, a signal or maybe just coincidence. But Zara reacted immediately. Her body tensed. "We have to stop," she said quickly. "Zara, not here," she insisted. Her eyes searched his one last time. "Please," she whispered, "if you really want to help us, don't rush this." Essien held her gaze, then nodded once, because now he understood. This wasn't just about getting her out. It was about breaking something much bigger, and if he moved too fast, he wouldn't just lose her again. He might lose everything. Essien did not return to Makoko that night. Not because he wanted to stay away, but because for the first time since finding Zara, he understood that presence alone could make things worse. He had seen the way the watchers moved, the way Bako had appeared without being called, the way Zara's entire body reacted to even the suggestion of attention. This was not a place where actions could be taken impulsively. So he stepped back. But stepping back did not mean doing nothing. It meant preparing. By the time he arrived at his apartment, the city lights had already taken over the skyline. The glass walls reflected Lagos in motion, cars weaving through traffic, neon signs flickering, distant sounds rising like a constant pulse. But inside, everything felt still. Essien removed his jacket slowly, setting it aside without thinking. His mind was already moving, replaying every word Zara had said, every glance, every reaction. "I was taken." The words echoed louder now, stripped of confusion, stripped of doubt. She had not left him. She had been taken from him. That truth changed everything. It erased 5 years of unanswered questions and replaced them with something far more dangerous. Intent. Someone had planned this. Someone had made a decision to remove Zara from his life, at a moment when she was most vulnerable. Pregnant, dependent, unprotected. Essien ran a hand through his hair, pacing slowly across the room. Who would do that, and more importantly, why? His phone buzzed. "Tunde," Essien answered immediately. "You left?" Tunde asked. "Yes." "Good." Essien exhaled. "She told me the truth," he said. A pause. "Then what truth?" "She didn't leave," Essien replied. "She was taken." Silence followed, heavy. Then Tunde spoke again, his tone more serious than before. "You're sure?" "Yes." Another pause. Then quietly, "Then this just got bigger." Essien didn't respond, because he already knew that. "She said it started the night she disappeared." Essien continued. "And it didn't stop there. She ended up in Makoko, under their control." Tunde let out a slow breath. "That's not random," he said. "No, that's organized." Essien stopped pacing. "Exactly." A moment passed. Then Tunde asked the question that mattered most. "Do you think it has anything to do with your business?" Essien didn't answer immediately, because that possibility had already crossed his mind. And it didn't feel far-fetched. 5 years ago, he hadn't been powerful, he hadn't been visible, he had been building, but quietly. There had been no reason for anyone to target him, or so he thought. "I don't know," Essien said finally, "but I'm going to find out." Tunde didn't argue. Then, we start from the beginning, he said. Everything that changed around that time. Every deal, every connection, every person who had something to gain from you being alone. Essien nodded, even though Tunde couldn't see it. Agreed. The next day, Essien went back further than he had in years. Back to records he had stopped thinking about. Old contracts, early partnerships. The first deals that had shaped Okoro Holdings into what it was now. At the time, those deals had felt small, necessary, survival-driven. But now, he looked at them differently. Because sometimes the beginning of something dangerous doesn't look dangerous at all. It looks like opportunity. Hours passed as he moved through files, names, and timelines. Most of it led nowhere. Normal transactions, forgettable interactions. But then something stood out. A name. Not because it was unfamiliar, but because it was too familiar. Chief Adewale Balogun. Essien leaned back slightly, staring at the file. The connection hit slowly, then all at once. Adewale, a man who had helped him in the early days, who had offered support when Essien needed capital, who had introduced him to opportunities he wouldn't have had access to otherwise. At the time, Essien had seen him as a mentor, a door opener, someone who believed in his potential. But now, looking back, there were things that didn't add up. Timing, influence, control, and most importantly, access. Adewale had known about Zara, about the pregnancy, about Essien's situation. He had known enough to understand where Essien was vulnerable. Essien's jaw tightened slightly. No, it couldn't be that simple. But it also couldn't be ignored. He picked up his phone again. "Tunde," he said as soon as the call connected. "I'm listening," Adewale Balogun, Essien said. Silence. Then, "You're serious?" "I'm not sure yet," Essien replied, "but the timing fits." Tunde exhaled slowly. "That man is not small," he said. "If he's involved, this is bigger than Makoko." Essien's voice remained steady. "I know." A pause. Then Tunde asked, "What do you want to do?" Essien didn't hesitate. "I want proof." Meanwhile, in Makoko, Zara was not at peace. She moved through her routine as she always did, working, keeping her head down, staying within the invisible boundaries that had defined her life for years. But something had changed. Essien's return had broken something open. Something she had spent 5 years trying to keep buried. Hope, and hope, in a place like this, was dangerous. Kofi noticed it first. "Mama," he said quietly as they sat together later that evening. Zara looked at him. "Yes, that man." He hesitated. "He keeps coming back." Zara's heart tightened. "Yes," she said. Why she didn't answer immediately. Because how do you explain something like that to a child? "He knew us," before she said carefully. Kofi frowned. How Zara swallowed. "Before we came here, we had a different life." Kofi didn't remember that life. He had been too young. Layla remembered nothing at all. Was it better, he asked. The question was simple, but it carried weight. Zara looked at him, at his thin frame, at the cautious way he moved, at the life he had grown up believing was normal. And her answer came quietly. "Yes." Kofi didn't say anything after that, but something in his expression shifted. Something that hadn't been there before. Possibility. Zara saw it, and it scared her. Because if hope grew, so would risk, and risk in Makoko had consequences. She pulled him closer slightly. "Listen to me," she said softly. "No matter what happens, you stay close to me. Always." Kofi nodded. "I will." Zara kissed the top of his head gently, but her eyes were distant. Because somewhere deep down, she knew things were already changing, and this time, she might not be able to stop it. Back in the city, Essien stood by the window looking out over Lagos. The pieces were starting to connect, slowly, carefully, but not completely. Not yet. Still, one thing was clear. This was not random. This was not just about Zara. This was about something planned, something controlled, something that had started 5 years ago and had never really ended. Essien's reflection stared back at him in the glass, calm, focused, unshaken. "I'm coming for the truth," he said quietly, and this time, he wasn't just searching, he was closing in. Essien moved carefully now. Not slowly, but deliberately. There was a difference. For 5 years he had searched without direction, driven by hope and desperation. Now, for the first time, he had something else. A pattern, a beginning, and possibly a name. Chief Adewale Balogun. The more Essien examined the past, the more that name refused to stay in the background. At the time, Adewale had been everything Essien needed: connected, experienced, respected. He had offered advice, introduced him to partners, even helped secure the first real contract that stabilized Okoro Holdings. But influence always came at a cost, and sometimes that cost wasn't immediate. Essien sat across from Tunde in a quiet office room, the files spread out between them like pieces of a puzzle. "Look at the dates," Essien said, tapping lightly on one of the documents. Tunde leaned forward. "This deal," Essien continued, "was signed just 2 weeks before Zara disappeared." Tunde scanned the page, and this one, Essien added, sliding another file forward 3 days after. Tunde's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's tight," he said. "Too tight," Essien replied. Tunde leaned back, crossing his arms. "So what are you thinking?" he asked. Essien didn't answer immediately, because saying it out loud made it real. But avoiding it wouldn't change anything. "I think Zara wasn't just taken randomly," he said finally. Tunde nodded slowly. "And you think Adewale had something to do with it?" Essien met his gaze. "I think he knew enough to make it possible." A pause. Tunde exhaled. "That's a serious accusation." "I know, and if you're wrong, I'm not moving on assumptions," Essien cut in. "I'm moving on patterns." Tunde studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right," he said. "Then we follow the pattern." The next step wasn't confrontation. Not yet. It was confirmation. Essien reached out to contacts he had built over the years, people who understood the hidden layers of business influence and power in Lagos. Some conversations were careful. Others were indirect. Because when you ask the wrong questions too openly, people stopped answering. But slowly fragments began to surface. Adewale was not just a businessman. He was connected, deeply connected, to networks that didn't appear in official records, to systems that operated in shadows, and more importantly, to people who controlled places like Makoko. That connection wasn't documented, but it was known, quietly, carefully, the kind of knowledge people shared only when they trusted you, or feared what might happen if they didn't. Essien listened to all of it, without reacting, without revealing how much it mattered, until one conversation stood out. An old associate, someone who had worked briefly under Adewale years ago, spoke more openly than the others. "He doesn't get his hands dirty," the man said, "but he knows who does." Essien leaned slightly forward. "What does that mean?" "It means if something needs to happen, it happens," the man replied, "and no one traces it back to him." Essien's voice remained steady. 5 years ago, he said, would he have had reason to target someone close to me? The man hesitated, then asked, "What kind of reason?" Essien didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "What if that person made me unpredictable?" A pause. Then the man spoke again. "Then yes," he said. "That would be reason enough." That answer stayed with Essien, not because it confirmed everything, but because it made everything possible. Zara, pregnant, a responsibility, a potential distraction, a vulnerability. If someone wanted to shape Essien's future, removing that vulnerability would be one way to do it. The thought settled heavily in his chest, because if it was true, then everything he had built, everything he had achieved, had been influenced from the beginning. And that meant this wasn't just personal, it was structural. Meanwhile, in Makoko, Zara felt the shift before she could explain it. It wasn't something visible, not immediately. But it was there. In the way the watchers moved, in the way people spoke more quietly when she passed, in the way Bako appeared more often, without needing a reason. She had lived long enough under control to recognize when that control tightened. And it was tightening now. That night, as she finished her work, Bako approached her again. Not abruptly, not aggressively, just present. "You've been distracted," he said. Zara kept her eyes lowered. "No," she replied. Bako studied her. "You don't lie well," he said. She didn't respond, because denying it further would only make things worse. Bako took a step closer. "That man," he said, "he's important to you." Zara's hands tightened slightly at her sides, but she didn't speak. "That makes him important to me," Bako added. Her breath caught, subtle, but enough. Bako noticed everything. He offered to pay. Bako continued. "That's not common." Zara forced herself to stay still. "It doesn't change anything," she said. Bako's expression remained calm. "It changes everything," he replied. A pause. Then more quietly, "Men who can pay usually have more to lose." Zara's heart pounded harder, because she understood what that meant. This was no longer just about her. Essien had become part of it. A target, and that was exactly what she had tried to prevent. "You should tell him to leave," Bako said. "I did, then tell him again." Zara nodded slightly, but inside, she knew it wouldn't matter, because Essien was not the kind of man who walked away from something like this. And that was exactly what made him dangerous. Back in the city, Essien stood in his office, looking at the documents spread across his desk. The connections were no longer distant. They were forming a line, from Adewale to the networks, to Makoko, to Bako, to Zara. And suddenly the picture was clearer. Not complete, but clearer. "This wasn't random," he said quietly. Tunda, standing nearby, nodded. "No," he agreed. Essien looked up. "It was controlled." "Yes, and it's still happening." Tunda didn't argue, because that part was obvious now. "So what's the move?" he asked. Essien's eyes hardened slightly. "Not payment," he said. Tunda raised an eyebrow. "No." Essien shook his head. "That's what they expect," he replied. "And expectation is control." Tunde considered that. Then what Essien didn't answer immediately. Because the next step was not simple, it wasn't clean, and it wasn't without risk. "We break the system," he said finally. Tunde exhaled slowly. "That's not small. I know. That's not fast. I know. And that's not safe." Essien looked at him. "I know." A long silence followed. Then Tunde nodded. "All right," he said. "Then we do it right." Essien turned back to the window. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass, full of movement, full of life, and full of things hidden beneath the surface. "I'm done reacting," he said quietly. "This time, we take control." And somewhere deep within the system that had held Zara captive for 5 years, the balance had already begun to shift, even if no one else could see it yet. Essien did not rush into confrontation. That would have been the version of him from years ago, reactive, driven by emotion, willing to risk everything for a single moment of justice. But 5 years had changed him. Now he understood something deeper. Power was not just about force, it was about timing, control, and knowing exactly where to strike. The first move was quiet. Essien began pulling at threads, small ones, at first almost invisible to anyone not looking closely. Contracts tied to Adewale Balogun's network, financial flows that passed through shell companies, transactions that connected legitimate businesses to places like Makoko, where nothing was written down but everything was accounted for. He didn't do it alone. Tunde handled the legal pathways, reviewing documents, identifying inconsistencies, building a case that could hold weight if it ever needed to surface publicly. Essien focused on connections, people, patterns, and slowly, the truth began to take shape. Adewale wasn't just a businessman. He was a strategist, a man who understood how to build influence without leaving fingerprints. And 5 years ago, Essien had been part of that strategy, not as a partner, as an investment, a man with potential but also with weaknesses that could be controlled. Zara had been one of those weaknesses, not because she made Essien weak, but because she made him human. And in a world where control depended on predictability, human attachments were variables. Variables could be removed. The realization didn't come all at once. It built piece by piece, through records, through conversations, through silences that said more than words. Until finally, it was undeniable. Adewale had known. Maybe he hadn't given the direct order. Maybe he hadn't even needed to. But he had created the conditions. And in those conditions, Zara had disappeared. Essien sat across from Tunde. Late one evening, the city outside, quieter than usual. "So, what you're saying," Tunde said slowly, "is that he didn't just benefit from her disappearance. He built the system that made it possible." Essien nodded. "Yes." Tunde leaned back, rubbing his face. "That's not something you confront lightly." "I'm not confronting him," Essien said. "Not yet." Tunde studied him. "Then what are you doing?" Essien's expression didn't change. "I'm removing his protection." A pause. Then Tunde let out a slow breath. "That's dangerous." "Yes, but effective," Essien added. The next phase moved faster. Essien began leveraging everything he had built over the years. Influence, connections, reputation. He reached out to people who operated at levels above Adewale's visible reach. Regulatory bodies, financial oversight groups, individuals who had the authority to ask questions that couldn't be ignored. He didn't accuse, not directly. He presented inconsistencies, patterns, irregularities that required investigation. And once those questions were asked, they couldn't be unasked. Adewale's network began to feel it. Not openly, not dramatically, but subtly. Accounts were reviewed. Transactions were flagged. Conversations became more careful, more guarded. And in systems like this, pressure travels downward. In Makoko, that pressure arrived quietly, but it was felt. Bako noticed it first. He didn't say anything at the beginning, but his behavior changed. He spent more time moving between areas, more time speaking to people in low voices, more time watching, especially watching Zara. She felt it immediately. The tension that had always existed around her tightened further, like something was closing in. One evening as she finished her work, Bako approached again. This time there was no pretense of casual conversation. "You didn't tell him to stop," he said. Zara's hands stilled. "I did," she replied. Then he didn't listen. She didn't answer. Because that part was true. Bako stepped closer. "Do you know what happens when someone doesn't listen?" he asked. Zara's throat tightened. "Yes." "Then remind him," Bako said. Her voice came out softer than she intended. "He won't." Bako's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then that's a problem." Zara felt the weight of that word settle heavily. Problem. In Makoko, problems didn't stay unsolved. They were removed, quietly, efficiently. Her heart began to race. "You said he could pay," she said carefully. Bako tilted his head slightly. I said he could try. Zara's breath caught. That's not the same thing she said. No, Bako replied calmly. It's not. The truth behind those words hit her instantly. This had never been about letting her go. It had been about seeing how far Essien would go. And now that he had stepped further, he had become part of the system. Not outside it, inside it. You're making this worse, she whispered. Bako's expression remained unchanged. No, he said. He is. Zara shook her head. He doesn't understand. Then he'll learn, Bako replied. Her chest tightened, or Bako didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night, Zara couldn't sleep. Kofi and Layla lay beside her, their breathing steady, unaware of the storm building around them. But Zara felt it. Every second, every shift, Essien had come back into her life. And with him, everything she had tried to keep separate was colliding. Hope, fear, truth, danger. She had spent 5 years surviving, by staying invisible, by following rules, by not resisting, and now, that fragile balance was breaking. Because Essien wasn't invisible. He was visible, powerful, and unwilling to step back. Tears slid quietly down her face as she stared into the darkness. I tried, she whispered softly, not to anyone in the room, to the past, to the version of herself that had believed leaving would be enough. But it wasn't, because some systems don't let go, they tighten. Back in the city, Essien stood in front of a large glass window in a private meeting room. Across from him sat a man who rarely agreed to meetings like this, a senior official, someone who had the authority to open investigations that reached deep. Essien didn't speak in accusations, he spoke in facts, patterns, connections, and, when he finished, the room was silent. The official leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. You're asking for a lot, he said. I'm asking for the truth, Essien replied. The man studied him carefully. And if that truth leads somewhere, uncomfortable, Essien didn't hesitate. Then it leads there. A long pause followed. Then the man nodded slowly. All right, he said. We'll look into it. Essien exhaled quietly, because that was the moment where things moved beyond his control, into systems that could expose everything or destroy it. As he walked out of the building, his phone buzzed. A message from Tunda. They're reacting. Essien looked at the screen for a moment, then typed back, good, because reaction meant pressure, and pressure meant cracks, and cracks. Eventually, broke systems. But Essien knew something else too. When systems break, they don't go quietly. And, somewhere in Makoko, Zara was standing right in the center of it. The pressure did not stay quiet for long. What began as subtle shifts, questions asked behind closed doors, accounts quietly reviewed, names mentioned in cautious conversations, soon started to ripple outward in ways that could no longer be contained. And when pressure rises within a system built on control, something always breaks. In Makoko, that break began with silence. Not the ordinary silence of survival, but a different kind. A watchful, tightening stillness that moved through the narrow paths and wooden walkways like an invisible signal. Zara felt it before she saw it. People spoke less around her. Some avoided her completely. Others looked at her longer than usual, curious, cautious, calculating. And the watchers. They were no longer just watching. They were waiting. That evening, Bako did not approach her immediately. He let her work. Let her move through her routine, let the tension build, until finally, as the last light of the day faded, and shadows stretched longer across the settlement, he stepped forward. Walk with me, he said. It wasn't a request. Zara's heart tightened, but she nodded, because refusal was not an option. She turned to Kofi and Layla, crouching slightly to meet their eyes. Stay here, she said softly. Don't move. Kofi looked uneasy. "Mama, I'll be back," she assured him gently. He hesitated, then nodded. Zara stood and followed Bako. They moved away from the crowded paths, deeper into a quieter section of Makoko, where fewer people lingered. The air felt heavier there, more controlled, more watched. Bako stopped near a narrow structure, turning to face her. For a moment, he didn't speak. He simply looked at her. And that was worse than anything he could have said. "You've caused attention," he said finally. Zara kept her eyes lowered. "I didn't mean to." Bako's expression remained calm. "But you did." A pause, and now he continued. "Attention has consequences." Zara's breath caught slightly. "What kind of consequences?" she asked quietly. Bako stepped closer. "Depends," he said, "on how this is handled." Zara forced herself to stay still. "I told him to leave," she said, "and he didn't listen. I can try again." Bako shook his head slowly. "It's past that now." The words landed heavily. Zara felt her chest tighten. "What do you want?" she asked. Bako studied her for a moment, then said something that made everything shift. "I want him to understand," he said. Zara frowned slightly. Understand what? Bako's eyes hardened just a fraction. That some things don't belong to him anymore. The meaning was clear, and it cut deep. Zara swallowed. "He's not going to accept that," I know, Bako replied. "And that's the problem." Across the city, Essien felt the shift too. Not physically, not yet, but through the reactions of the system. He had begun to disrupt. Tunda had called earlier. "They're closing ranks," he said. "What does that mean?" Essien asked. "It means the pressure is working," Tunda replied. "But it also means they're going to push back." Essien stood by the window looking out over the city. How Tunda hesitated. In ways that don't always show up on paper. Essien understood. Because systems like this didn't rely only on contracts and accounts. They relied on fear, on control, on making examples. And Zara, she was still inside it. "I'm going back," Essien said. Tunde's voice sharpened slightly. "No." Essien didn't turn. "I'm not waiting while they tighten things around her." "And you think walking in there again is going to help?" Tunde asked. "I think doing nothing won't." A pause. Then Tunde exhaled. "Then we do it together," he said, "and we do it right." That night they returned. Not cautiously this time, not quietly, but with purpose. Essien didn't hide his presence as he moved through Makoko, and that alone changed everything. People noticed, watchers shifted, and word spread quickly. By the time he reached Zara's area, Bako was already there, waiting. Zara stood nearby, her posture tense, her eyes searching Essien's face, as if trying to understand why he had come back like this. "Essien," she whispered. But he didn't stop. He walked forward until he stood directly in front of Bako. The space between them was no longer cautious. It was confrontational. "You said I had time," Essien said. Bako's expression remained calm. "You do. Then I'm using it." Bako tilted his head slightly. "For what?" Essien didn't hesitate. "To end this." The words landed like a line drawn in the sand. Around them the air shifted. People slowed, watched, listened, because this was no longer a quiet exchange. This was something bigger. Bako's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're speaking like you have power here," he said. "I do," Essien replied. Not loudly, not aggressively, but with certainty. And for the first time, Bako paused. "Not long, but long enough to notice." "You've been busy," Bako said. Essien didn't deny it. "Yes, and you think that changes things?" "I know it does." A silence followed. Then Essien stepped closer. "You don't control this anymore," he said quietly. Bako's expression hardened slightly. "Careful." "No," Essien replied. You be careful. The shift was undeniable now. This was no longer about negotiation. This was about exposure, and Bako understood it, because men like him survived by staying hidden, by operating where no one was looking. And now, someone was looking. Zara felt it. The change, the breaking point. Her heart raced as she watched the two men face each other. This was what she had feared. Not just confrontation. Escalation. Essien, stop, she whispered urgently, but he didn't move, because he couldn't, not anymore. I know who's behind this, he said. Bako's eyes flickered, just slightly, but it was enough. And it's not you, Essien added. That changed everything, because now, the truth was no longer hidden. Bako stepped forward, closing the distance completely. You don't know what you're saying, he said. Essien held his gaze. I know enough. A long silence followed. Then, Bako stepped back. Not in retreat, in calculation. Because something had shifted. The balance. And for the first time, he wasn't fully in control. Then let's see how far you can go, Bako said. His voice was calm again, but the meaning behind it had changed. This was no longer containment. It was challenge. Essien didn't respond, because he didn't need to. The next move would decide everything, and somewhere deep within the system that had held Zara captive for 5 years, cracks were no longer forming. They were breaking open. The breaking point did not come with noise. It came with exposure. 2 days after Essien's confrontation with Bako, the system began to unravel. Not from the outside, from within. Investigations that had started quietly were no longer contained. Financial irregularities tied to Adewale Balogun's network surfaced in official reports. Shell companies that had once operated in silence were now being questioned openly. Names that had stayed protected for years were suddenly being spoken in rooms where silence used to be enforced. And once those names were spoken, they could not be buried again. In Makoko, the shift was immediate. Bako felt it before anyone told him. Calls that were usually answered went unanswered. Messages came back slower. Instructions that once carried authority now met hesitation. For a man who built control on certainty, that hesitation was dangerous. He stood near the edge of the settlement that morning, watching the movement of people with a sharper focus than usual. Something was slipping, and he knew exactly where it had started. Essien. Zara noticed it too. The watchers were no longer as steady. Some avoided direct eye contact. Others moved with a kind of restless uncertainty she had never seen before. For the first time in 5 years, the system around her didn't feel unbreakable. But that didn't bring relief. It brought fear. Because systems like this didn't collapse gently. They reacted. And when they reacted, people got hurt. Zara held Kofi and Layla close that morning, her arms tighter than usual. Stay with me, she said softly. Kofi looked up at her. We always do, he replied. She forced a small smile. I know. But her eyes were distant, because she understood something they didn't. Change was coming, and change was never simple. Essien stood in a government office building, his expression calm but focused as he listened to Tunde speak with one of the officials leading the investigation. They've confirmed the financial links, Tunde said. Adewale's network is being pulled apart. The official nodded. This is bigger than we expected, he admitted. But it's solid. We have enough to act. Essien didn't speak, because this was the moment he had been building toward. Not revenge, not confrontation, truth. And now the truth was moving through systems far beyond Makoko. What about the ground operations, Essien asked. The official looked at him. We're coordinating with local enforcement, he said. Places like Makoko won't be untouched by this. Essien nodded slowly, because that was where Zara was. And that was where everything would either end or begin again. Back in Makoko, the reaction came fast. By midday, word had spread. Authorities were coming, not in secret, not quietly, openly, for the first time in years. And that changed everything. Bako stood in the center of the settlement, his presence still commanding, but no longer absolute. People looked at him differently now, not with defiance, but with uncertainty, because power once questioned never returns to its original form. Zara saw him from a distance, and for the first time, she didn't feel the same fear, not because he had changed, but because the system behind him was breaking. Still, she didn't move, not yet, because she had learned the hard way hope without certainty could still destroy everything. When Essien arrived, he didn't come alone. This time he walked with purpose and with presence that could not be ignored. Officials moved behind him, not aggressively, but with authority that spoke for itself. Makoko reacted. People stepped aside, paths cleared, and for the first time since Zara had arrived there 5 years ago, something felt different, not controlled, not watched, free, even if only for a moment. Zara saw him immediately. Her breath caught. Essien. He stopped in front of her, close enough to see everything. The exhaustion, the strength, the years that had passed between them. "It's over," he said quietly. Zara didn't respond. Not immediately. Because for 5 years, nothing had ever simply been over. "Is it?" she asked softly. Essien held her gaze. "Yes." Behind him, movement continued. Officials speaking to people, names being called, structures of control being dismantled piece by piece. Bako stood at a distance now, watching, not interfering. Because for the first time, he couldn't. Zara followed Essien's gaze and saw it. The change. Real. Unavoidable. Her grip on Kofi and Layla loosened slightly. Not in fear, in disbelief. "This is real," she whispered. Essien nodded. "It is." A long silence followed. Then slowly, Zara took a step forward. Not away. Toward him. The movement was small, but it carried 5 years of weight. Kofi looked between them. "Who is he?" he asked again. Zara looked down at him, then back at Essien. Her voice trembled slightly, but this time not from fear. "This is your father," she said. The words hung in the air. Soft, but powerful. Kofi's eyes widened. Layla looked up slowly, her expression uncertain. Essien didn't move. He didn't rush forward. He didn't try to close the distance too quickly. He just stood there, waiting, because some things couldn't be forced. Kofi stepped forward first, carefully, curiously, stopping just a few steps away. "You came back," he said. Essien nodded. "I said I would." Kofi studied him, then asked the question that mattered most. "Are we leaving?" Essien glanced at Zara, then back at him. "If you want to," he said. Kofi didn't hesitate. "Yes." Layla moved closer to Zara, her small hand slipping into hers. Zara looked at both of them, then at Essien, and for the first time in 5 years, she didn't look afraid. She looked free. "I think we're ready," she said softly. Essien nodded, and this time, he stepped forward, not as a stranger, not as a memory, but as something real, something present, something that had survived everything that tried to break it. Family. As they walked out of Makoko together, the world didn't change instantly. There were still questions, still wounds, still years that couldn't be undone. But something had shifted, something fundamental. Because truth had been revealed, control had been broken, and what remained was the chance to rebuild, Not perfectly, but honestly. And sometimes, that was enough. Some losses are not what they seem. Sometimes people don't leave because they want to, but because they believe it's the only way to protect the ones they love. Silence can hide pain. Distance can hide sacrifice. And the truth often takes time to rise. Essien spent 5 years searching for answers, but what he found was deeper than loss. It was courage, survival, and a love that refused to disappear, even under control and fear. Zara survived, not because she was weak, but because she endured what most people never see. And in the end, truth didn't just free her. It restored a family that never truly stopped belonging together. If this story touched you, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Do you believe love can survive silence like this? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this remind us that even in the darkest places, hope is never truly gone.